In ancient Rome, there was a law that existed for only one reason. Not because of war, not because of chaos, but because one man was simply too smart. He didn't break the law, he didn't rebel. He understood the system better than the system understood itself, and Rome had no choice but to create a brand new law just to stop him. Imagine being so clever that the most powerful empire in the world had to rewrite its rules because of you. Tonight, we explore the strange Roman law created to stop a man who was always one step ahead, and how intelligence became more dangerous than violence. But what exactly did he do that forced Rome's hand? In early ancient Rome, crime did not become more immoral after sunset. It simply became more convenient, and one criminal noticed this immediately. Roman streets at night were not romantic. They were pitch dark, uneven, loud in all the wrong ways, and full of people who absolutely did not want to testify in court the next morning. There were no streetlights, no patrols, and no reliable way to identify anyone once the sun went down. If someone robbed you at night, you could describe the experience in detail: the fear, the noise, the emotional damage. But the criminal, that person might as well have been a philosophical concept. Roman law, unfortunately, loved witnesses. It loved certainty. It loved being able to point at someone and say, you did this. And at night, that became very difficult. One criminal put this together faster than anyone else. He realized that stealing during the day was reckless. People saw you. People remembered you. People enjoyed talking about you in court. But at night, faces dissolved, voices blurred, cloaks became universal disguises, and suddenly, theft stopped being a legal problem and started becoming a paperwork problem. So he waited for darkness. He stole after sunset, slipping through streets where everyone was half asleep and deeply uninterested in heroism. Victims woke up furious, violated, and very specific about what had been taken. But when asked who took it, they offered a tragic shrug. A man, probably wearing something. Roman judges hated this. The courts could not convict on vibes alone, and Roman law at this stage did not treat nighttime theft as a separate category. Theft was theft. The sun was not legally relevant, which meant this criminal kept walking free, over and over again thanks to darkness doing all the heavy lifting. Eventually, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Theft rates climbed after sunset. Daytime crime stayed manageable. The problem was not crime, it was timing. Rome realized with growing irritation that the night itself had become a legal loophole, and Rome does not tolerate loopholes. So, lawmakers did what Rome always did when outplayed. They changed the rules. They created harsher penalties specifically for theft committed at night. If you were caught with stolen goods taken after sunset, intent was assumed. Darkness itself became suspicious. Night was no longer neutral. It was basically an accomplice. This law did not exist because stealing was worse at night. It existed because one criminal figured out the courts went blind after dinner. And from that moment on, Roman law began a long tradition of chasing clever people who kept saying the most dangerous sentence in legal history. Technically, I didn't break the law. Rome replied by writing another one. After nighttime theft, Roman lawmakers believed they had restored order. They were wrong, because while they were busy congratulating themselves, another criminal looked up, literally, and realized Rome had forgotten to regulate gravity. In ancient Rome, multi-story apartment buildings, known as insulae, lined the streets. People lived stacked on top of each other like anxious bread loaves. And from those upper floors, one clever individual discovered a fascinating truth. If you dropped something on someone from above, you hadn't technically assaulted them. At least, not yet. Roman law was very clear about direct violence. Punching someone, illegal. Stabbing someone, extremely illegal. But dropping a chamber pot, roof tile, or suspiciously heavy object from a window, that wasn't clearly defined. After all, you hadn't touched the victim, you had merely released an object and allowed fate to handle the rest. This criminal weaponized accidents. He leaned out of windows and balconies and let gravity do the work. Sometimes it was garbage. Sometimes it was construction debris. Sometimes it was whatever happened to be nearby and unpleasantly solid. Pedestrians were injured, goods were damaged, dignity was destroyed. And yet, when brought before a magistrate, the defense was beautifully simple. I dropped it. No intent, no target, just clumsiness. And Roman courts, bound by definitions, struggled. Was it violence? Was it negligence? Or was it just an unfortunate encounter between a Roman citizen and physics? Victims complained constantly. Walking through Rome became a trust exercise. You didn't just watch where you stepped, you watched the sky. Being struck by falling objects became common enough that people began hugging walls or sprinting through narrow streets like participants in an involuntary obstacle course. Eventually, lawmakers noticed something troubling. The same individual appeared repeatedly in complaints, always nearby, always accidentally present, always innocent in court. Rome had a problem. One person turned architecture into a legal loophole. So, Rome responded with a new law. Anyone who threw or dropped objects from a building that injured someone was liable, regardless of intent. It no longer mattered if it was deliberate, careless, or claimed to be accidental. The object fell, someone suffered, you paid. This law wasn't about safety, it was about humiliation. Rome did not like being outsmarted by someone who treated gravity like an accomplice. And so the law stepped in, not to regulate behavior, but to say loudly, no, you knew exactly what you were doing. And just like that, Rome learned an important lesson. If the law doesn't mention it, someone absolutely will. In ancient Rome, reputation mattered almost as much as oxygen. You could survive being poor, you could survive being unlucky, but being publicly accused of a crime, that could end your career, your friendships, your political ambitions, and occasionally your will to keep wearing a toga outside. Early Roman law assumed a very optimistic thing about human nature, that people would not accuse others of crimes unless they were telling the truth. This assumption lasted exactly as long as it took for one clever individual to realize how devastating accusations could be, even when completely false. This criminal didn't steal, he didn't stab anyone, he didn't throw chamber pots from balconies. He simply accused people publicly, loudly, strategically. He accused rivals of crimes they could not immediately disprove: theft, corruption, religious violations, things that required investigation, time, and witnesses. And during that time, the damage was already done. People whispered. Allies distanced themselves. Business partners suddenly became very busy. Even if the accused was eventually cleared, the stain remained. Rome loved procedure, but gossip moved faster. And the best part? At first, there was no punishment
If the
for being
accusation
wrong.
failed, the accuser shrugged and walked away. No consequences, no accountability, just social destruction delivered legally, efficiently, and with excellent timing. It was character assassination without the mess. Roman courts began to notice a pattern. The same accuser appeared again and again. Different targets, same outcome. The accused suffered, the accuser benefited, and technically he had done nothing illegal. He had merely spoken. This made Roman magistrates deeply uncomfortable. Rome could tolerate crime. Rome could tolerate corruption. What Rome could not tolerate was someone using the legal system itself as a weapon, especially when that someone kept smiling through proceedings like a man enjoying a very clever joke. So lawmakers responded with a new rule. If you accused someone falsely and could not prove it, you would face punishment. The accuser became legally vulnerable. Reputation warfare suddenly had a cost. This law didn't exist to protect truth. It existed to stop one man from turning Roman justice into a performance art piece. From that point on, accusing someone became risky. The courts were no longer just a stage. They were a trap for anyone too eager to weaponize words. And Rome learned another painful lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous criminal doesn't break the law, he uses it. In ancient Rome, funerals were not quiet, tasteful affairs. They were loud, emotional, public spectacles, and one criminal realized they were also the perfect hiding place. Roman funerals involved crowds, processions, musicians, hired mourners, dramatic wailing, and enough chaos to make accountability politely excuse itself. Everyone was expected to grieve loudly. If you were calm, you looked suspicious. If you were emotional, you blended right in. And if you wanted to commit a crime unnoticed, a funeral was basically a legal invisibility cloak. One clever individual noticed this immediately. He began using funerals as cover, pickpocketing mourners, settling personal grudges, spreading political rumors, even organizing small riots, all while crying dramatically and gesturing toward a coffin. And because funerals were sacred, officials hesitated to intervene. No one wanted to be the magistrate who arrested someone mid-wail and became that guy in Roman society. The criminal understood something brilliant. Funerals were socially untouchable. You could push people, shout accusations, whisper threats, cause disturbances, and if questioned, you simply replied, "I am overwhelmed with grief." Rome, unfortunately, accepted this explanation far longer than it should have. Complaints began to pile up. The same face appeared at multiple funerals, always nearby when trouble started, always loudly mourning people he barely knew, always innocent. The courts struggled. Was it illegal to cause chaos at a funeral? Technically, no. Was it immoral? Yes. But Rome didn't legislate morality. It legislated embarrassment. So lawmakers stepped in and did something very Roman. They regulated grief. They introduced laws limiting the size of funeral crowds, the volume of mourning, the number of musicians, and even how much dramatic performance was allowed. Excessive wailing restricted. Massive gatherings controlled. Public displays of grief suddenly suspicious. This law didn't exist because Romans hated emotion. It existed because one criminal turned funerals into crime scenes with background music. After the law passed, funerals became quieter, more controlled, and far less useful for criminals who relied on chaos and social discomfort as shields. Rome had learned yet another lesson the hard way. If something is sacred, someone will exploit it. And if someone exploits it too well, Rome will regulate it. Grief, like everything else in Rome, was now subject to rules. In ancient Rome, early law had a charmingly optimistic flaw. It punished using poison, but didn't clearly punish having it. And one criminal looked at that gap and thought, that seems like a personal invitation.
At first, poison laws were simple. If you poisoned someone, you were punished. Reasonable, sensible, very Roman. But lawmakers hadn't considered the uncomfortable middle ground, the phase where someone is walking around with poison, explaining that they have absolutely no plans, and asking why everyone looks so nervous. This criminal leaned hard into that gap. He carried poison openly. Sometimes he sold it. Sometimes he gave it away. Sometimes he just liked having it nearby, like a security blanket for people with questionable hobbies. And when questioned, he delivered the perfect defense. I haven't poisoned anyone yet. Legally speaking, that was airtight. Roman officials were deeply unhappy. Poison terrified Rome because it bypassed everything Romans respected. Strength, courage, public confrontation. You didn't see poison coming. It didn't care about rank. It didn't challenge you to a duel. It just quietly ended your career, and occasionally your breathing. The idea that someone could legally possess it unsettled everyone with influence, which was exactly the right people to unsettle. The criminal knew this. He exploited the fear without crossing the line. He created suspicion everywhere he went. People avoided him, rumors spread, enemies panicked, and still he walked free, smiling politely, poison tucked away somewhere inconvenient. Eventually, Roman lawmakers realized the obvious. Waiting until someone actually died was not a great legal strategy. So they did what Rome always did when cornered. They rewrote the rules. New laws criminalized the possession of poison itself. Intent no longer mattered. If you had poison, you were guilty. Explanation unnecessary. The logic was simple. If you don't plan to poison someone, why are you carrying poison? This law didn't exist because poisonings increased. It existed because one man made everyone feel like they might be poisoned at any moment. Rome didn't punish poison because it was immoral. Rome punished it because it was terrifying, and terror without legal control was unacceptable. And just like that, Rome learned another lesson. When someone is clever enough to stop one step before the crime, the law will move the line closer. Rome loved order. Rome loved categories. You were a citizen, a slave, a priest, a soldier, a magistrate, preferably something easy to recognize from a distance. Which is exactly why one criminal realized that changing clothes was basically changing legal reality. In ancient Rome, clothing mattered a lot. A toga wasn't just fashion, it was paperwork you could wear. Put on the right outfit and people treated you differently. Opened doors, looked away, assumed authority. And one criminal discovered that if the law respected appearances, appearances could be weaponized. He dressed as a slave when committing crimes that required invisibility. No one questioned slaves. No one remembered slaves. He dressed as a priest when he needed access to restricted spaces. Who questions a priest? He dressed as a woman when it helped him blend into crowds. He dressed as a minor official when he wanted compliance without paperwork. And every time he was caught, the defense was infuriatingly simple. I am wearing clothes. At first, Rome had no response. There was no law against pretending, no statute banning strategic wardrobe choices. After all, how could you regulate clothing without admitting that your entire social system was held together by fabric and confidence? Victims complained, guards shrugged, courts stalled. The criminal kept slipping through, changing identities faster than witnesses could keep up. One moment he was a slave, the next a respectable citizen, the next someone you definitely saw before but cannot legally describe. The problem wasn't the disguise. The problem was that Roman law trusted what it could see. Eventually, magistrates noticed a pattern. The same crimes, different descriptions, same outcomes. Someone was manipulating perception itself, and Rome does not like being made to feel gullible, so lawmakers acted. New rules restricted disguises in public spaces, especially those that imitated social classes, religious roles, or official positions. If you dress to deceive, not entertain, you are now breaking the law. This law didn't exist because Rome hated creativity. It existed because one man proved that identity in Rome was disturbingly fragile. After the law passed, clothing stopped being a legal cheat code. Guards became suspicious, witnesses were encouraged to look past outfits, and Rome learned yet another uncomfortable truth. If your system depends on appearances, someone will eventually change clothes and walk right through it. In ancient Rome, land was everything. Land meant wealth, status, food, power, and the right to look down on your neighbors with confidence. So, naturally, Rome assumed that once land boundaries were marked with stones, everyone would politely respect them forever. One criminal read that assumption and smiled. Roman property lines were often marked by boundary stones, heavy markers placed between fields, roads, and estates. These stones were considered sacred, stable, and unquestionably reliable. The law treated them like permanent facts of nature, which is exactly why one very patient individual realized something terrifyingly simple. Stones can be moved. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a few inches at a time. One quiet nudge after sunset, another nudge a few weeks later. Slowly, carefully, invisibly, the boundary shifted, and with it, so did the land. The criminal didn't storm fields or tear down fences. That would attract attention. He let time do the work. Over months, even years, the boundary stones migrated, and suddenly he legally owned more land. On paper, everything checked out. The stones were there, the land matched the markers. Anyone questioning it sounded paranoid. Neighbors complained, of course. They felt something was wrong. Their land seemed smaller, their crops closer to the edge. But feelings didn't matter. The stones were the law, and the law was standing exactly where the criminal had placed it. Roman courts struggled. No one had written a law against slowly relocating geography. It wasn't theft in the traditional sense, it wasn't violence, it was landscaping with ambition. Eventually, surveyors were brought in, priests were consulted, arguments escalated, and Rome realized it had been humiliated by a man with patience and a strong back. The response was swift and very Roman. Moving boundary stones became a serious crime, not just illegal, religiously offensive. Boundary stones were placed under divine protection. Tampering with them angered the gods.
Punishment escalated from fines to exile, depending on how bold you'd been with your landscaping. This law didn't exist because people were clumsy. It existed because one man treated property law like a puzzle. Rome learned an important lesson. If your legal system trusts physical markers absolutely, someone will eventually pick one up and walk away with half a farm. And from